free to pop any questions in. But yeah.
I'm Rachel. I'm a first-year law student, and I'm at St Hilda's.
Hi, I'm Sadia. I'm a first-year law student at Brasenose.
Okay, so we'll talk. I think we'll kick off with the LNAT because people want to know about that, because I've done all the Q&As so far, and there's a lot of worry out there about what the LNAT is, how much preparation is required. So I guess what works is we'll just do the same order of what we've just done, talk about our experience, the LNAT, and then we can discuss it. If any questions come through, we can discuss those, and then I'll try and remember if there are any common questions that people have asked, so we can address those too. So I'll just start by saying that sort of the point of the LNAT is it's not a test that's meant to be revised for. It's not really testing knowledge, it's testing thinking. And so in my experience, the best preparation is just practice, like familiarizing yourself with the format and the questions that they ask, the sort of general area, because the way it works is there's the first part of it is a multiple choice sort of thing where you're given a big block of text and multiple choice questions on what you understand the text to say and things like that. And then the second part is 40 minutes to write an essay. You get 3 questions to choose from, and you just write sort of a persuasive essay on one of those topics. You're not required for any of this to have any particular knowledge. It's sort of it is as much a thinking test as anything else. So there's lots of books and stuff out there which I imagine are helpful, but I think the most helpful thing in my experience was familiarizing myself with the format, so that when I got there, it wasn't like, what am I supposed to do? And I've said a lot, so I'll pass on now to see if anyone else has got anything to say.
Sure, I don't mind. I think, yeah, everything that Ted just mentioned are very valid. You really need to practice. I think not just practicing on paper, but also practicing on the online system. You can get sort of it's not the actual program, it's a simulation of the program you use, because you take the LNAT online, well, not online, but on a computer. So they have a software that is on the LNAT website. You can download it to practice, I think 1 or 2 tests, I think 1. And so you can get used to, first of all, how sort of the whole program works, but also time limit and typing without autocorrect. I think that's a big thing for typing essays. If you want to practice on other programs, there's a sort of software on Windows called like Notepad. Like I think every computer has that. If you're using Mac, I don't know, but then like there's something called that. So just don't type with autocorrect. And I think in general, the experience is that you really have to manage your time well for essay questions. For MC questions, for the first part, for multiple choices, because some of the questions are going to be tough and you won't have enough time sort of to think everything through. So the target is not really to get full marks, but to just get as much answers correct as possible, and always work with elimination. Don't try to sort of directly pick from 5. Always try to cross out 2 or 3 before trying to make a pick. I think that's very sort of helpful. But yeah, and also for the essay, the essay, I think you can at maximum run 2.5 arguments. So 2 of your own arguments and half it would be a sort of counter argument. So like what the other side would say and then your rebuttals. Anything more than that, you probably would be short on time and sort of never end abruptly for the essay. I think that's the biggest thing. Yeah.
I think just to add as well, and a really important part about the LNAT is that it's not the be all and end all of your application. And one thing that Oxford really stresses is that your application is looked at holistically. So the LNAT just forms one part of your application, as well as your personal statement, your references, your grades, your interview, and each part of those plays a bigger part within your application. And ultimately, if the LNAT doesn't go as good as you might have hoped it would, that doesn't mean that you're not going to get in, right? because there's no pass or fail mark. You know, there are averages that people get in with, but there certainly isn't a pass or a fail. And I know that I wasn't really happy with how mine went, and I'm still here. So, you know, there's always different parts that they look at. And so keeping that in mind is really important, to not stressing yourself out too much about it. But definitely, you still got to do a lot of practice for it. And that's not to say you have to be practicing months and months and months in advance, but just making sure that you're familiar with the style even, and with the time frame, and, you know, how long you can have for each section, and actually practicing that on the online systems, as the others have said, because there are loads of free resources online. You don't have to be paying for loads of books or courses. There's a lot of free stuff available out there, and it's really just putting some time aside to have a look at that in advance.
Yeah, I think just to echo what everyone else has said, I think practice is probably the main thing, but also I would say, like, don't overdo it. So it's kind of, the format of it is, I think, pretty easy to get to grips with. So I think I started my LNAT prep in late August, and that's just because my school wanted to get all early applicant kind of applications done by like the beginning of October. So that gave me just about a month to do so, including like schoolwork and things like that. And I got in a couple of practice papers done. So I think I'd recommend, again, like starting at some point in August or like late August. And also, I think Oxford does look at the essay section more than the multiple choice. And that's more because, well, with the multiple choice section, you're not really going to be doing that, first of all, in your degree. Second of all, that kind of thinking isn't something you would really be exposed to at A level. So again, it's not the end of the world if you don't get the best, you know, LNAT score on your multiple choice. So I would probably look at doing practice essays, especially if you're someone who doesn't do essay subjects, and maybe get some of your school teachers to just have a quick read through and like give you tips and pointers, because I think that's one thing you can kind of perfect. So like essay structure.
I totally agree with all that's been said so far. I think the point that's been really emphasized is that don't over prepare. And I also think there's no set way of preparing. So I know like Sadia, a lot of people who went elsewhere and to Oxford started in late August, but if you feel more comfortable starting a bit earlier, that's also an alternative. I think the point is just don't over prepare, because you end up stressing yourself out, and that can affect your performance ultimately. For instance, what I ended up doing is starting out by just doing a passage a day, which is really low commitment. I did it quite early because that was something I could fit around with my summer plans and work that was set by school, but it wasn't too much that was stressing me out, and just built it up towards the end of term. And I also like that fellow ambassadors have also stressed that the point that there's a lot of free resources online, but additionally, law is quite a popular degree wherever you go. And the LNAT is not a admission test that is specific to Oxford. A lot of other universities require you to take the LNAT. So you'll often find a lot of people in your school that might be applying to do a law degree at a different university, but one that requires LNAT. So something that I did, for instance, was put together a bit of pool of money to buy a book that we would share, and we'd each do the answers ourselves. And that meant that books that were £40 ended up being quite affordable, and it had loads of tests. So that's another way to access resources. And additionally, practice is key, and put enough emphasis on the essays. I know that there's some universities don't put emphasis on the essays, and thus people don't prepare as much for them. But as Sadia said, they're quite different to anything you do at A level. They're quite open and almost philosophical in nature. You can either go one way or another with them, and that's something that you might not encounter at A level, especially if you don't do essay-based subjects. So just make sure you give enough attention to that.
Cool. I think we've covered a lot of what's generally asked. I think Rachel's point about how that the mark for the multiple choice isn't necessarily, it's not the be all and end all. In fact, I know somebody who I interviewed with who got the same mark in the multiple choice as I did, but didn't get in. So if you needed any demonstration of how the application is a multiple factors in consideration, I think that's possibly a good one. I think we've covered a lot of ground there. So if interviews vary quite a lot, so we could probably all talk about our experience with those, because yesterday, we all had quite different interviews. And so if we want to cover that, I think that's probably, we could start that now and then come back to the LNAT if we think of anything else we want to say. I'm talking a lot, so I think if someone else wants to start, then please feel free.
It might be for Sadi and I to compare our experiences.
Sure.
Because we both interviewed at the same college, and so I also met her on the interview day, and that impacted how I felt about going into my interviews. So different colleges might do it differently, but different colleges might have a different structure to their interviews. But at least at Brasenose, a lot of people came in stressing about their personal statement, which is good to know your personal statement and make sure that you are honest on that. But you don't need to reread your book 5 times over and know every quotation, every page, which is something that I know a lot of people worried about, being questioned on the books they read and experienced. But at least at Brasenose, the interview was more focused on pre-reading that we were given prior to the interview. So we had about 30 minutes of pre-reading time, which was for us usually a court case. And then we went into the interview. There was usually more than one person there, and there's usually someone taking notes. A piece of advice is to not be disturbed or scared by someone that's doing that. They're just trying to take notes in the interview. It's not an intimidation technique. If you just focus on the questions that they're asking you, it will feel a lot less stressful. And often when you go into the room, actually the interviewers, those interviewing you, will make you feel comfortable. There's like a sofa and they'll introduce you and talk a little bit before getting right into it. So it's just important to, obviously you can't say don't be stressed, because everyone's stressed and you may feel like there's a lot of writing on it, but just try and relax a bit. And in the interview, we were asked a lot about what we were reading and more insightful questions on it. So we covered some basics from like what court was it in, who were the judges, who are the parties, stuff like that. And then they pointed us to more specific paragraphs within the cases. So based on my experience, so I would say reading just like cases, that's the best interview prep I could think, just getting used with some of the terminology being used. And then outside of interviews, this is just something that I'd caution against. Don't equate your experience with other people's experiences. For instance, I know that there was the whole range. There was someone who came out crying, which terrified me because it was 20 minutes before my pre-reading. And I also know there was someone there who was like, yeah, it was easy, and I had not found it so easy, and I was actually really stressed after that interview. So just make sure that there's no identical experience, and they might not even ask the same question. So if someone's found it easy, someone's found it hard, that's not telling of your own experience and your own success with interviews.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Zara said. So I think, well, for me, I did 2 interviews, both at Brasenose, and generally with interviews, and I think this applies to other colleges too, there's usually one interview that's slightly harder than the others. And I wasn't aware of this. And unfortunately for me, I had the harder interview first and I walked it in. And so, like Zara said, I really think you should take the time to familiarize yourself with the structure of like a court judgment. So for example, being able to identify what court it's in, what the kind of judgment was, because they do ask you that in the interview. And so, basic things like that I knew I was just like tripping up on in the interview, just because I was so intimidated and it was my first one. And he was really grilling me. And what they tend to do is after they ask you about that specific case you've read on, they extrapolate from that and they'll change the facts a bit. And they'll ask you whether your opinion changes. And if so, make sure you always explain why. And if not, even if they are grilling you, like they'll grill you either way, whether you agree with them or not. So just always explain your thinking, I think, and you should be good to go. But I remember leaving that interview and coming back to my room and just crying because I was like, this is horrible. In the space of 20 minutes, I ruined everything. And I was on the phone to my parents and I was just such a mess. But then for my second interview, and just before, I think I'd met Zara. So I actually knew Zara before interviews. We'd met very briefly at a debating competition, but I spoke to her and she was like, yeah, you had the harder one first. Like that seems to be the general consensus. And I think that calmed me down a little bit. And I was like, this explains a lot. So I went into the second one and I felt a lot more confident. And it was, I think, just generally easier than the first one. And I think that's important to remember because like Zara was saying, you really don't know what's going through the interviewer's mind. Like my first one, went awfully for me. Like I hated it, would never repeat that experience again. But, you know, I'm still here and I didn't have to do a third interview. So maybe it went better than I thought it did.
Yeah, so I interviewed at a different college to those two. So I'm at Lincoln, I interviewed at Lincoln. I had 2 interviews. There was definitely a good cop, bad cop situation with them. I luckily had my good interview first. So I came out of that one feeling pretty good, only to have my hopes and dreams shattered the next day by my second interview. But so I didn't have judgment-based interviews. This is why I'm talking about the college variation. So my college so I had pre-reading of statute. So I got, for my first interview, I had a piece of legislation, I think, on trust law, because they do try and target something that you definitely won't have read about in advance. So that's a point I'll quickly pick up on, is that the same for the LNAT is the over preparation probably won't help you that much. So as they'll put effort into making it basically impossible to prepare for. So I had a piece of statute on trust law, and I had like 3 sort of small scenarios that I was meant to apply that law to. And so I went in and I did that. And then they gave me another scenario on a piece of paper to apply. So they wanted me to sort of talk through how I would apply it to that one. I said quite a lot of stuff that was wrong, but that's sort of the point. It's like supposed to be what a tutorial would be like in Oxford, to say we want to gauge how you react to that sort of teaching environment. And so they give you gentle nudges. They won't just let you get stuck. They're not there to sort of trap you. It's a discussion of the law. And then the second half of that one, they threw me a sort of a completely different thing. They asked me about something about war crimes and my approach to something like that. And I was like, okay. And it's just the key is to not panic. I think you've just got to sort of take a few seconds to sort of think about what they've just said, and then just like come up with something to say, and then talk through it, and then they'll probably provide you some new information, see if your opinion changes or how you adapt to that. And then my second interview, I got a piece of statute again on company law and shareholding, and that was very hard. They gave me one really long scenario to talk through, and the whole interview, the whole half an hour was on that. And he really gave me the grilling of my life. And at the end, he was sort of like, so after all that discussion, do you think there's a point to having a law on this subject? So I was like, yes. And there was that sort of discussion. I've seen someone's just asked that Sadia mentioned a third possible interview, and the way it works is basically colleges will do 2 interviews. I think this year it's 2 interviews at every college, the standard policy. And then I can't remember, I would need to be reminded, but the way it worked for us when we didn't have them online was 2 interviews, and then you can get pooled, which is where another college takes an interest in your application, just to give you the best possible chance of getting in. If colleges got lots of good applicants, you can spread it across colleges. But as I was saying, just the way it works just varies so much. So if you come out thinking you've done badly, it's probably because you've just been asked about a subject you know nothing about by someone who knows everything about it. So it's really just exploring how you think rather than getting the right answers. And I've managed to ramble on again, so I'll stop talking for a minute.
I'm happy to go next. So I think mine was a bit more similar to yours, Ted. But I personally had no questions asked about my personal statement, apart from just one to break the ice at the beginning. That doesn't mean that you won't get asked about them. It completely, again, depends on the college. So, also don't think that you can get away with just throwing in books that you haven't actually read, or, at least not going over them before your interview. But I also had about 30 to 40 minutes before my interview with a piece of statute, and I had some scenarios to apply it to. And so, I just had the time there to annotate it, to jot down my ideas, have a think about it. And then, in terms of the actual interview itself, as others have said, I'm probably just repeating exactly what they've said, but, it really is about the process and not the final answer. So, be ready to change your views as you go. With law, it's not something that a lot of people have studied before university. So the tutors aren't expecting you to know all of the law. Not that you could, but it's more about, how do you respond to the prompts that they give you? How do you explain your reasoning? And, it's fine to get it wrong or even to not know the answer, so long as you give it a go and say, okay, well, on the basis of what you've given me and what I think I know, here's what I think it might be. And for the most part, that'll do you pretty good. And it's all about that thought process and explaining your reasoning, because at the end of the day, the tutors want to see the way that you think. And again, similar to the others, I found my first interview a lot scarier than my second. So, I came out of that and I thought, oh gosh, I've really flunked it. But then my second interview went a lot better. So I think with that, try not to be thrown off if you find one more difficult. You really just have to put your best foot forward for the next one. Because obviously you'll have them with different tutors, they'll have different opinions. And again, it's all part of that bigger process. So you just have to, come back from it if you do find that it doesn't go as well as you'd hoped. But that's really sort of my experience without sort of repeating what everyone else has said.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm from a different college, so probably different experiences. But then I've heard also from other people at different colleges. So I suppose that the process is more or less similar. Everyone gets something to read before they go into the interview. Whatever it is, it can range from, I've heard of statutes, I've heard of scenarios, I've heard of just literally stories and cases. Obviously, that's obvious. So I think learn. I think someone mentioned learn how to sort of read the case, approximately know how it's structured so that you don't get caught out. Statutes are sort of more understandable, I suppose. But I want to talk a little bit perhaps maybe about prep, because between the time when you get sort of the interview offer and until you get sort of the actual interview, there's approximately a month or two between that. So you won't be able to sort of predict what questions you get, but you can prepare for sort of how you engage in a discussion, because it's different from sort of how you chat with your friends, or even if you have even if you do debate, like I did debate and I did mock trials and stuff, but it's different. It's similar, but it's different. So you sort of need to know that you can't always maintain your own stance. Like, don't change at once when you are when someone points out something, but then you need to be sort of teachable. That's sort of the word we used to go for when we talk about interviews at my school. Like, tutors want to know that you're teachable. You're not someone who sort of sticks to his or her own opinion for like full hour. If they tell you something, you're able to adapt to that, and then you need to show how you realize maybe some of your thoughts were wrong, or maybe some of your preconceptions were not justified, and how you move on from there. So changing is definitely changing the stance is fine, but explain why you changed it. And as to preparations, just try to, what I did with my friends who also did interviews at like Oxford or Cambridge, is that you can just go online, Google like Oxford law interview questions. There are like tons. Just talk it through with your friends. Like, if they have interviews, you don't exactly need to pretend to be an interviewer or whatnot. Just discuss whatever the question is, and I think that's very helpful, because it just helps you prepare to think in a particular way, or to just answer sort of more philosophical / legal-like questions. And also, for me personally, I mean, I did the interview in person. You guys will most likely do it remotely, I think. And obviously it's a bit different, but what I did was that sort of 20-ish minutes before I have my interview, I would sort of sit down and just run through the sort of simple questions that they could ask in my mind, and sort of literally voice out my answers so that I'm ready for the discussion and I'm ready to answer common questions like, oh, why do you want to study law? Like, what is the purpose of having laws and all that? Just general questions that warms up my brain. Works for some, works for me, but I don't know if it works for everyone. But I think it's a good way to prepare for the interview. And I mean, my interview experience is just more or less similar with everyone else. I will say this though, I think like the hard interview everyone was like stressed about for me was the easier one for me. Like I didn't feel like either one were too difficult, you know, but then I credit that to me doing sort of debate and lots of mock trial stuff. But then like there will be times when you feel like people think it's difficult and you think it's easy and you feel like maybe you did something wrong, and that's not the case. And also last note is that tutors are usually nice. Like even if they grill you or even if they ask like tough questions, they're not trying to trick you up. Like if you ever have an interview that where an interviewer tries to sort of trip you up, that's probably not a good place to work or study at. Like that's an advice I got. So they're not trying to like trick you. They're just trying to push you to see if you still maintain your own sort of opinion even under pressure, and how you respond to sort of opposite arguments from the other side. So like, yeah, they're nice people. Don't be like scared by your tutors, and you, yeah, just don't be scared. And even if the questions are getting tough, you can always take some time or ask them to clarify, or just, you know, tell them that you're not sure. That's okay. But yeah, don't take it as if it's a quiz. It's not a quiz. It's more of a discussion. So it's okay if you don't know or you're not sure. But yeah.
Cool. Does anyone have anything else to add?
Sorry, I just was going through sliders, so I know it's just a quick question just to add on to the end. I thought it would be suitable. I think Harry mentioned how he prepped for interviews, and I just thought to quickly mention that some colleges have done mock interviews with current students. For instance, I know that Jesus College on their YouTube channel has a mock law interview with one of the first years, and I even looked at some of the Cambridge ones. I know that it's a bit like, I think Trinity College at Cambridge does one. I know they're not, obviously Cambridge is not Oxford and there are differences, but it's a very similar type of style and similar questions. So those are some free resources that I could point you to. But just wanted to mention that there's no book that's going to help you answer it, because they, as Ted and Harry and everyone else mentioned, there's no formula, there's no specific thing they're going to ask you. It could be completely something unbeknownst to you, and it usually is unbeknownst to you. So I think that's the best way to, but don't stress too much about it.
Something I'd also quickly add on is I like, if you're a sixth form student now, I would probably speak to, if you have someone that deals with Oxbridge applicants, either speak to them or just like a teacher in your school that kind of deals with university applications, and get them to contact the access officers or something similar at the colleges. So the lead person at Brasenose is Joe Organ. And usually if you email them and say, hi, we've got a few students, or, you know, I'm a student at this sixth form, and I don't have a lot of access to things like mock interviews, because quite a few of the private schools do things like that. Usually they're very helpful and they will do that for you. And if they can't, then they'll usually guide you towards resources. So I think that's always worth a shout.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all colleges at the moment are very conscious of their access, and so it's definitely worth trying to get in touch. If you've got someone at your school or sixth form dedicated to that, then that's a good idea, or otherwise you can get in touch with them yourself, I imagine. I think, yeah, yesterday we talked, there was this question we could probably address quickly, is anything you think is an absolute no-no for an interview? And I think there isn't really much, because they're so varied and they're so broad. But I think probably the most important thing is something we've touched on already, is to make sure you're flexible in your thinking and you don't stick to a point that they've pushed enough information at you to know that you should logically be able to tell that your position isn't tenable anymore. I know, because as I said earlier, you don't know anything and they know as much really as you can know. So it's a good idea to make sure that you are taking on board what you're being told by the tutors, as you would be in a tutorial, and sort of taking that on board and talking to them as to whether your position's changed, and if so, why your position has changed.
In terms of other sort of no-nos, I'd say probably asking questions for the sake of showing off, because like they see right through that, the tutors will. I mean, if you've really got something interesting to ask, or you're unsure, then yeah, definitely. But I think as a general rule, I think questions that can actually be valuable to your interview are probably quite few. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, something else.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going
Sorry,
to
go ahead.
add on, because Emma put this in the chat and I don't think this is visible to the viewers. So if there are enough law students at your school that are looking to do the LNAT or applying to Oxbridge, that's something we could like assist with. So we could do a little presentation for your school or work with your school with that. And yeah, I just wanted to relay that message.
Yeah, but something similar to what Rachel said, don't show off. Like, it's very unlikely you will know more than your tutors, and it is sort of impossible, put it that way. So if you've read a case, or does that apply to me, sort of, if you've read a case and or sort of some areas of the law, like, great, but then don't try to forcefully apply it in your interview. Like, if it's relevant, then use it. Obviously, one of my friends had an interview where some of the law was on like criminal law, and I sort of did a little reading on that. So show that you can sort of engage with that, but don't forcefully push it in. And if you're not sure, don't pretend that you know it, because like again, your tutors have sort of studied those things in detail, so they know more than you do, even if you think you do know everything. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
If I might just add, I think Ted was talking, and everyone else has, but just recently mentioned that you should be flexible with your reasoning. And I would emphasize that to the utmost importance. But I would also say being flexible does not mean not having an opinion, in the sense that I think even personally, I almost got into a bit of a rut with this in one of my interviews, because going in, everyone tells you to think out loud, be flexible, because they're trying to teach you. They need to know that you're teachable. But that does not mean you're not allowed to have an opinion. At one point in my own interview, they were like, "Are you sure about that?" And I was like, "No, I'm not sure." And then I didn't know what even my own opinion was. But that's not the point. They want to hear that you have an opinion, and that you can express your reasoning behind that opinion. So you've got to strike a bit of a balance between having an opinion and being able to express your reasoning behind it, and even argue for it at some points if you're sure about it, because sometimes they might try to test the strength of your opinion and whether it holds. But also then have that flexibility to change your answer when they're indicating that it might not be wrong, or that there is perhaps more nuance to it.
Sorry to jump in again. I just remember this very quickly. Please don't ever pay for any of those services that will tell you, for £200, we will do 2 mock interviews and give you detailed feedback. Don't pay for those, because they are a waste of your money, especially considering there are loads of free services available that are verified through the university. One of them is UniReach. So it's recently been given the label of, I think, a charitable organization. And basically they're kind of targeted for sixth formers who are looking to apply to Oxbridge or other universities for whatever subject you want, and you can book online and have a one-on-one session with anyone from either Oxford or Cambridge for your subject. So I'd recommend that. Also, if you do know students at the university you're looking to go to, I'd say, even if they're not doing your subject, I'd say, just drop them a message and they may be able to guide you towards someone who does. I get messages quite a lot from people I've never met before, and that's quite helpful, and I'm always willing to help. And if not, I would also recommend on LinkedIn, if you go like on the university page and kind of see who else is a first year at the college you are looking at, and just drop them a message. A lot of the time they're very willing to help.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something to bear in mind, is that you don't need to be tutored into how to interview, because they are structured in a way where if you need help with something, the tutors, it's not meant to be like a job interview where you're on your own. It's meant to be like a mock tutorial, like you would be taught if you were an Oxford student, where you come in with some knowledge of the law that you've just been given to read, and it's essentially a mini tutorial, because we're every week we're given something to read, and then we show a tutorial and we talk about it. It's that sort of format. It's not it's not the be all and end all. Similarly, like it's also, if you feel like you've done badly, as we've said already, you might not have done, and even if you have, you've got other, like, tutors are aware that some people don't perform in that sort of pressured situation, and so it won't end your application if an interview didn't go so well, because you've still got your grades and any experience you put in your personal statement and your LNAT and things like that. So it's not, don't put everything onto an interview, just like you shouldn't put everything onto the LNAT or onto your A-level grades or onto your extracurriculars. They look at everything, and they understand that people have different circumstances. And so, yeah. If there's nothing else, we could probably talk about how the course works or college selection. I don't mind. I think quite a lot of people are asking about colleges today, so I guess we could talk about how we came to our decisions. Someone who hasn't started yet want to start?
I just thought it might also be worth, in the process, I saw a lot of questions on Slido about like researching the law before or whatnot. It might be,
Oh yeah,
it might be worth talking about with that also our personal statements and how we came to like express our interest in the law.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Right. Someone also wants to know about entry requirements. So if you're a UK student, the entry requirements are 3 A's at A-level, and then the international law equivalents, I think. If you we're not really experts on all the different international qualifications, so if you go and look at the admissions pages, you should be able to find information relevant to you. But yeah, so quickly with college selection, I went to an open day, the university open day, back when they were still in person, and I looked around some of the well-known popular colleges like Balliol, Trinity. I think I went to Exeter, and we sort of stumbled across Lincoln, because Lincoln is quite known for not being known at all. So it's sort of in like a little corner of Tull Street, which is in the city centre. So it's an Oxford college, but it's small and sort of out of the way, even though it's in the middle of the city, and it's got a huge tower. But so I hadn't been particularly impressed by the other colleges. There was I didn't feel like there was an environment there, because I think I should probably preface this actually. So college choice is more about the environment where you want to live and eat and make friends, rather than where you want to excel academically. We've had a lot of questions about this, and college, you don't really choose a college for your subject, because there's a lot of faculty teaching, there's lectures by leading academics, and tutors are, they're all Oxford professors. None of them are going to give you a bad education. And so I think when you're looking at college, you've got to look at sort of what you would like to see. So I went to Lincoln and I saw a bunch of really friendly people who were all friends with each other, and they all knew each other, and it was like a small little college, but it had everything I'd want from an Oxford college. Like, it was built in like 500 years ago. There's like a nice big dining hall, and a cozy sort of common room, and I thought, wow. And they guarantee accommodation and everything like that. And I'm gonna stop advertising my college, because this is a faculty talk, but like, that's what you want to choose. You want to choose your college for the environment. You don't want to choose it for obviously, if there is like a tutor there, then maybe it'd be worth applying to that college if you attach that much importance. But it's important to note that fellows at a college aren't always going to teach. Like, one of the fellows at my college is currently on sabbatical for a year, so I had my contract law the last term taught by someone else, and actually I had my tort law taught by a fellow from another college as well. So this term that we've just had, I had no teaching at my college. So I really think college selection is what I've just said. It's environment, and it's living, and it's not so much academics. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think yeah, you can look at different sort of the numerous tables online, and you can sort of look at them to sort of give you a rough idea. But I don't think, like, don't just go for, oh, that a particular college is ranked #1 in law. Like, it's not, doesn't exactly work that way. And I think what you really want to look at, as Ted mentioned, is really the culture and the living. So sort of different things to look at would be the size. Do you want to be in a big community, or do you want to be in a small community? Do you want to be close to city center, which obviously means closer to your Tesco's, your supermarkets, and your restaurants, and sort of entertainment in general? But at the same time, it means it's more noisy, and usually, I don't know, some people don't like living close to city center. Because you're just sort of, I don't know, crammed there, because I'm not close to city center, not really. Or how far do you want to be? Like, there are colleges that are very far away from the city center. And also, how close do you want to be to your law faculty? Advertisement for my own college, I'm from St. Catherine's, it's the closest college to the law faculty. I always say, even if it's like pouring or it's snowing, whatever, you can still reach the law faculty. Like, if you can't reach the law faculty, it's doomsday. So yeah, you might want to think about that. And yeah, culture is very important. I feel like it's harder to get to know cultures with sort of virtual events, but try your best and talk with students from colleges if you can. I think they are able to sort of tell you how the college feels like. And yeah, as to tutors, I think, as Ted said, you don't know who's actually going to teach you. So don't take, I don't really think it's worth picking a college because of tutors, unless you have a great admiration for a particular tutor, but still he or she might not teach you. It's just that you're in the same college. And yeah, I don't think, just don't go for a college because someone is there, or because of presumed superiority in terms of academic abilities. That's not true. Like, it's not, like, rankings change all the time. It just depends on that cohort. It has nothing to do with like teaching quality or whatever. So yeah.
I think I agree with everything that's been said, but something else you might want to consider is maybe college finances. So for example, some colleges will be able to give you bigger bursaries, more bursaries, and things like that than others will be able to. And that may be important to you. So personally for me, Brasenose has been quite great with that. And stuff like that is really useful because the Oxford terms are so intense. It's recommended that you don't have a job while during term time, just because it's kind of almost impossible to have a part-time job and be part of the whole Oxford culture and keep on top of your work. And so having a college that can support you so that you don't even have to consider that, I think it's really important. And you might also want to look at things like facilities. So for example, one of the benefits of going to a bigger college is that the chances of you having facilities with something like, I don't know, if you really want an ensuite bathroom for some reason, it's probably greater. So if you really, really want an ensuite bathroom, but you don't actually have an accessibility requirement, the chance of you getting that Brasenose as a first year, pretty slim. So I'd also consider things like facilities and finances.
I think I agree with completely what everyone said so far. I also think that with each college, there's a win some, lose some type of thing that goes on. Like, they have their advantages and they have their disadvantages. I don't go to Christchurch, I just know a bit about it. But for instance, going with off what Sadia said, Christchurch basically guarantees you an ensuite every year. But perhaps the downside that people don't consider is perhaps it might be too big. It might not have the closer culture that you might experience at smaller colleges. So there's a give and take, and you sort of, when choosing what colleges you want to go to, it might be useful to draw up a list of like things that you value. Because some people might, for instance, I prioritize the architect. As someone who wanted to go to Oxford, and have that dark academia vibe, I really valued like the older architecture. That was something I really looked for, and Brasenose being right on the Radcliffe Square, which is like there's that fancy building, was something that was a draw for me, and also how central it was. but then you might not value that. You might value being close to your faculty's building, the law faculty building, for instance. One thing you might want to consider is perhaps some of the colleges might have some unique law aspects to it. So for instance, at Brasenose, we have the Law Library and the Ellesmere Society, which is the law society at our college. And in first term, they hosted a moot, which was really good because in our third term, we have to sit a moot, essentially, to develop our legal research skills. So that was something that I really valued. And the Law Library itself was quite a big hub for lawyers at our college, because everyone goes there, whether you're first year, second year, or third year, studying for final all your mods. So there might be some niceties to your college that are specific to your degree, but that's not necessary. If I might round off by just pointing out that even if you're pooled to a different college, that's not the end all be all. It doesn't mean that won't define your college experience. I know people who have applied to Brasenose twice and got pooled to Hertford, for instance, and they're having the best time of their lives over there. Your college experience is just one part of your Oxford experience, and each college will be amazing and accommodating to you. So don't worry too much if you get pulled and end up in a college you didn't apply to.
Yeah, can I just add on that? Because I remember my tutor said one thing. She applied to new college thinking it's the newest college. It's not. And she ended up at my college, and she loves it. So we're just saying that to say that do your research, but also as Zara said, it doesn't really matter which. I got pulled, so it doesn't matter where you end up really. Like obviously make a pick, but then ultimately wherever you end up, you will find people who sort of have similar interests as you, are like sort of like you, and then it will be fine.
If that's all that's been said about colleges, it might be worth just talking a bit about personal statements, because a lot of people might be, if anyone wants to start off with that, I just thought that might be, if we combine like our personal statements as also how we chose Oxford law as a degree as well.
Yeah, so I think personal statement wise, it's really, there isn't a set way to go about it, I don't think. And if there was, that'd be kind of harsh, because you're not told that anywhere. I think the most important thing to focus on is that your interest in law, or whatever subject you're applying to, it comes through. I don't think you don't, like, because there are people always asking about sort of extracurricular activities, work experience, internships. It's like, well, if these things show that you're interested in the subject, then by all means put them in. But if they don't, like someone asked me how they could force the subject of their EPQ into an interview, and it's like, you don't want to force anything in an interview. That's just a point back on interviews. But similarly, you don't want to force anything onto your personal statement. If it doesn't fit with the subject, then don't put it on. You want to, the personal statement is not very long, so you want to use every word of it to show how interested you are in learning your subject, and how you think you're suited to learn that subject. And I think so long as you've got that, then you don't need to worry about the percentage academic work and the percentage extracurriculars. Like mine, I think I had a couple of books, how I found constitutional law interesting, because I did politics A level, and like I finished it off with like a bit about like I play cricket. Like it's sort of it's an open format, because to not have an open format would be kind of strange. Yeah,
I don't mind going next. I think just a few tips that I got, and also I think like these are what I thought were useful when I did mine. First of all, never try to copy. Like, don't try to go online and find a template and go, oh, this looks nice, and then try to fit your stuff into that template. Like, it doesn't work. It will never work. And yeah, just never like blatantly copy something. It's there will be people who copy, and it will come up on whatever checks. So don't plagiarize. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think as Ted mentioned, there isn't really one sort of way to go with personal statements. Everyone has sort of different ways of writing their own personal statements, because although it's not entirely personal, but then it's still everyone has their own reasons for why they want to do a particular degree. And as the extracurricular, it's sort of not, don't put everything in, put in what's sort of relevant to the degree. I think people call it like supercurricular now. It's just that those are things that are relevant to why you want to apply to law. And by the way, name dropping will never work. That's also one thing that we should probably mention. And ultimately, I think you want to start off with, say, just a general question of why you want to do law. Like there must be a reason why you started to get an interest in law. Like for now, you may say there are more complicated reasons, such as being interested in, I don't know, like arguing cases in court, but maybe it started off with you watching some sort of legal drama and then it developing from there. You can use that process to find things that are interesting and then show how you develop that interest. So it's sort of like, if you're interested in, legal drama, then say you learned about how court proceedings work, then maybe there are inequalities in the legal system. People can hire better lawyers and some people can't, or some lawyers are lazy and some lawyers are not, so you get different qualities, and all those stuff. So yeah, like just go with your interest and don't be too concerned about, is this too sort of different, or whether this is something that usually people write about, because there's no sort of usual normal way to get like a good personal statement. It's just whether you can display your interest in law. That's all they're looking for.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And I think to kind of add on, I think it's kind of important to remember when you're writing your personal statement, especially if you're applying for Oxbridge, that you're applying to 4 other universities too. So don't forget that. So generally, it's kind of recommended that there is an 80-20 split. So like 80% of your application should be catered towards law and why that's interesting to you. And then 20% of it should be extracurriculars. So things like, I don't know, being a prefect, being the captain of your sports team, something like that. And there is no set structure for a personal statement. It will, vary from person to person, but I found it quite useful to structure it so that my first paragraph was about why I wanted to do law and what kind of struck my interest in the first place. And then my second one, so I kind of themed it. So my first paragraph was about public international law. And then I did it on EU law, then contract law. And then my final paragraph, that 20%, was just about like extracurricular activities. And another question that I get asked quite a lot is about work experience and mentioning that on your personal statement. I just want to mention, first of all, finding legal work experience generally is extremely difficult. And there is no requirement at all for you to have any kind of legal experience. But if you do, that's great, mention that. And if you want to look for some, do. But also, especially in a COVID year, like that's even more difficult. So, and everyone recognizes that. So again, there's no requirement. But something that's quite helpful to mention is one of the, I guess, good things about law is that it literally touches like every aspect of your life. So one of my friends in the second year, he wasn't able to find any kind of legal experience, but he was a shop assistant at Argos. And he used that as a springboard to talk about how, doing his work at Argos, he became really interested in consumer law and consumer regulations. So you can literally use like very everyday, normal kind of jobs to talk about the law. So I think that's quite a good thing to mention.
I totally agree with what Sadia said about legal work experience. Even now, it's hard and difficult to get that legal work experience because there's so many people who want to become a lawyer who are pursuing law, and there's so little experience that can go around for everyone. So it's not a requirement, but I also understand that it can be an access issue. So for instance, the law can be affected by people who have connections and perhaps could get easier access to that legal work experience. If I can point any of the viewers watching to 2 resources, there is something called Prime, which lists all the work experiences hosted by firms. The Brokerage is also a really great social mobility foundation that offers work experience, not only in legal firms, but other firms, and obviously there's transferable skills, as Sadia was talking about. It's just keep an eye out for the colleges. A lot of colleges release like law competition essays and so on. And that's a great way to engage and show your interest in the law, because ultimately your extracurriculars and what is labeled as supercurriculars are just ways of expressing your interest in law, and that's obviously expressed differently from person to person. I think the thing that comes up quite a bit is there any books or is there any reading that you should do before? And the typical books that come up is like The Rule of Law by Tom Bingham, Letters to a Law Student, there's The Secret Barrister, and that's no way compulsory reading. You don't have to read it, and no way do you have to include it. It's a really good starting point, I think, if you're unsure about what exactly is your interest in the law. At least personally, I found that I knew I always wanted to do something law related, but I couldn't really pinpoint what was that specific reason that I wanted to do it. And in your personal statement, as mentioned by Ted, it's really, you have so few words, you've got to be concise and you've got to be specific. And so that's a really good starting point if you want to like investigate what your interest is. But it might be more useful to use that as a launching block and narrow it in from there to see what your specific reasons are. And additionally, I might note that you are going to do a lot of reading and a lot of stuff from year 12 to year 13. It's a year's worth or years bit and more worth of work experience, reading and so on. And you're not going to be able to condense that into about approximately 400 words or a page. It's simply impossible. So you have to be really selective with what you think expresses your interests the most. Going back to the reading, and there's something that Harry pointed out, there's no specifics. If you're not superior for reading a book and putting down that you read a book, there are multiple mediums that you can talk about. And for instance, I didn't really find many books specific. I found one book that was specific to my interest, but I talked more so about articles that I had read, podcasts that I had listened to, and those are all great ways of showing that you have an interest in the law. And it's like I said, Sari also had a really different structure to her personal statement. I started off with a specific experience that made me interested in the law, and then I treated it almost as a narrative, going through how I developed that and other issues that I had, and linking it to my A levels and linking it to other extracurricular, and then ending off again with my just a brief summary of it. So as Harry said, and as everyone said, there's no specific structure, but looking at other past examples is really important, and even getting people to read it just to see that it's understandable. It doesn't have to be someone who's an expert like a teacher. I got my sister to read mine and just hear her thoughts on it. And last point of advice, your first draft is not your last draft. It's not what you're going to submit. It's either going to be too long and it can go through a lot of refining. So just make sure you start it early and don't leave it to the last minute.
Just something to add before we sort of round it off, but it's about why you want to study law as an academic subject, not why you want to be a lawyer. And I think that's something really important to focus on, because the tutors want to see why you want to learn about it, why you want to be involved in it as an academic subject. And that kind of reflects back on the fact that you don't need legal work experience, because that's something that you can figure out later. And actually, if you speak to a lot of law students, even they don't even know if they want to go into law. So no one's expecting you to have that as your primary reason for doing it, just as a gateway to then go into a law career. So that can really shine through in your personal statement, and rather that they want to see the skills that you can apply to the degree itself, lateral thinking, reasoning skills, and all of those things, as the others have said, can be gained from way more than just legal work experience. So just to emphasize that. And also I think going for something Zara had said, something that I was told as well was trying to find a sort of thread within your personal statement. So how did doing an EPQ in this subject, how did that lead to you, wanting to develop more into some other questions that you had from that, and therefore I read this book, and therefore I attended this lecture. And if you can find a way to sort of bring those all together to show that development and how you sort of went about going beyond what you just started off with, can really show your interest in the subject.
Great. Well, we've pretty neatly reached the end of our hour to talk. I'm just going to quickly say, if you're watching this, you're interested in the sort of the structure of the course itself, then go onto YouTube and to watch yesterday's panel where we talked about that a bit more in depth. But otherwise, yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you guys for putting in the effort and the time today. And thank everyone for watching. We've had about 250 people on the website watching, and about lots of questions being asked. So it's been really good. Like you say, everything that's on the website for the open day will stay on the website for the next week or so. But it obviously won't be live. It'll just be the videos of everything that's gone on. Go to the colleges, have a look at their videos as well. And yeah, we hope to see your applications come through soon and see you have students with us.